Ahoy and welcome back once again to the channel. In today's video, I've got what I think anyway is an epic watch from Seagull to show you. This thing is just a vintage inspired beauty. Now, if you're familiar with my channel, then you'll know I do like vintage watches. Watches from, well, predominantly the 70s. And in fact, I probably lean more towards the sort of Seiko and Citizen quartz watches from the 70s. I love the styling. I also love the fact that those watches back then were just built to an incredible standard. Now, the watch I'm showing you in today's video is not a quartz watch. It actually has a really nice movement inside it. The Seagull ST2100. It is the day-date version of a movement that I've featured on my channel many times, the ST2130. This is a legal clone of the ETA 2824, and this is, of course, the day-date version, 28,800 beats per hour, hacks, hand winds, 28 joules, I think. Yeah, I really like this movement, but that for me is not why this watch is really cool. It's just the way it looks. Now, funnily enough, they reached out to me inviting me to review this watch, and I almost turned down the opportunity because in the pictures, I don't know, it just didn't really do anything for me. You've also got made in China on the dial. That's not a massive turn off for me, but I think for a lot of people out there, it is going to be a bit of a turn off. And yeah, I looked at it a couple of times and then went back to them and said, you know what, actually, I would like to see it. And when it turned up, I was very pleasantly surprised. In my hand, it just looks a lot better than it did in the pictures. And I think they've nailed it in the sense that the right parts that I would expect to be brushed are brushed. The right parts that I would expect to be polished are polished. The fluted bezel, I think, is the only thing, well, apart from the made in China on the dial, the fluted bezel is, yeah, the one thing that maybe I'd like to have seen done a little bit different, perhaps. Again, I think that is going to be something that deters quite a few people from, well, even considering this watch. The bracelet has really impressed me. It's so in keeping with the sort of bracelets I've come to expect from watches from the 70s. The thickness, the style, they've used split pins. The clasp is a butterfly clasp, you know, it's fairly standard. That's not the sort of clasp I would expect to have seen on a watch from the 70s. I also wouldn't have expected to see an exhibition case back. But when you look at this watch as a whole, I think it looks pretty good, doesn't it? And I love the fact that they've used this particular movement with the day-date complication at the 3 o'clock. The hands are great. The applied indices are great. The sunburst, silvery sunburst dial is fantastic. Yes, legibility could be called into question. There is some lume. It's not great. I'll show you the lume degrading at the end of the video. And the finishing on the case in particular is really quite impressive. It's super crisp. The corners, yeah, are fantastic. The finishing on the bracelet, perhaps not quite as clean and sharp, but I'd actually expect that. I don't think bracelets back in the day were finished to a particularly high standard. And if you don't like this bracelet, well, they've given you hidden lugs, but 20mm lugs, so you can wear this watch on an alternative strap. Two pieces of crystal. The crystal in the front of the watch is a piece of flat sapphire crystal with AR coating. The crystal in the exhibition caseback is mineral crystal. I would have liked to have seen a couple of pieces of sapphire for the money. I'll talk about the price of this watch in a minute. 100 meters of water resistance, screw down caseback, screw down crown. No quality control issues with this particular watch. Everything's working as it should. The movement is running very nicely. Perhaps a few seconds a day fast, but I'd rather that than it be a few seconds a day slow. Now, I've been able to get a pretty much perfect fit with this watch. There's no half links, and I actually wouldn't expect there to be with this particular bracelet because the links are only 4.5mm long. So most of you should be able to get a pretty decent fit. And on my wrist, I love the way this thing looks and feels. The dimensions are fantastic. It's so reminiscent of so many vintage watches that I've handled I've actually imported, don't tell the wife this, but I've imported around 300 vintage watches over the years from Japan. So to say I'm a little bit of an enthusiast when it comes to sort of Seiko and Citizen vintage watches is perhaps a little bit of an understatement. It is one of the reasons why this sort of watch excites me so much. It's not very often you see a sort of remake or a new vintage inspired watch like this get it as right or as close to right as this watch. Brands like Citizen have made sort of vintage inspired reissues, and they've just been, I don't know, massive, or there's been something about them that has just turned me off them. This one, however, oh man, it's good. It is good. But it's not cheap, sadly. We are, of course, talking about a Seagull watch, and for those of you not familiar with Seagull, they are a premium brand from China. They've been producing watches for many, many years, and they produce a huge number of automatic movements for the watch industry, for the global watch industry every single year. And their watches are made to a particularly high standard. So you are going to pay a bit of a premium despite these watches being sold on AliExpress. Now, when I went onto AliExpress in preparation for this review, I saw that the price was 526 US dollars. I immediately contacted them and said, let's be serious, what is the actual price, or what is the sale price going to be? Because I think the price needs to come down. And they reached out and said, well, it'll be around 400 US dollars. People should be able to pick this watch up if they get all the discounts and everything for around 365 US dollars. Look, it is still a touch high. Yes, the movement's great, the build quality's great, I love the design, but unfortunately, I don't see it being a particularly popular one, not because of the way it looks or anything like that. It's just the price. I think it's going to deter quite a few people. And it's a real shame because this is an absolute cracker.